Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I am here with the first part of my July wrap-up. The quest to figure out a way that I can do wrap-ups in a timely manner continues. Also, I really apologize if the fan is distracting. It is very, very hot here. I always do captions for my videos, so please feel free to turn those on, especially if that is distracting for you. Okay, so the first book I finished in July was Welsh Fairy Tales, Myths and Legends by Claire Fayers. This is in there's like a few of these that have come out. There's an Irish folklore one which I have read, and then also a Scottish one which I haven't yet read, and they're all by different authors, and this is just a selection of how many, let's see, like 19 or 20 different Welsh fairy tales, myths, and legends. And in this like short little book, so they're fairly short tellings of these stories, and I loved this so much more than I was even thinking I would. And like the only reason I say that is because I had really enjoyed the Irish one, which again was by a different author. Like I really did enjoy that. I think I gave it 4 stars, but like this one, I think the writing of Claire Fayers and like the way she told these stories just worked for me even better. Like I genuinely really enjoyed her writing style, like her turns of phrase, the way she could like characterize some of the people in these stories even though she had so few pages to work with. I loved the humor, and I also just really enjoyed reading these stories that I am really not familiar with. Like there's a few that I had kind of heard of, but in general Welsh mythology is not one of the ones that I know a lot about. So I just had a wonderful time with this. If you're looking for this kind of book, I would definitely recommend it, and I gave Welsh Fairy Tales, Myths and Legends 5 stars. I also really love the different cover designs for all these books. Next I finished Ruby Holler by Sharon Creech, and this is like technically a reread but basically not, because I read this book so long ago. I remember I read quite a few Sharon Creech books as a kid, and I've been rereading some of these as an adult and loving the experience. I also listened to this one on audiobook. You guys may notice I'm doing a lot more audio than I normally do, because I've been doing a lot of like cleaning and organizing, and it's nice just having something on in the background. Also, Donna Murphy narrates the audiobook. I love Donna Murphy, and I would like her to just narrate like so many more children's stories, please and thank you. But she did a fantastic job with this. So this is a story following 2 twins, Dallas and Florida, and they are orphans. They've been left at this like foster home or this like orphanage, and they are viewed as being trouble. It's hard for them to get placed with foster families, and when they do, things always seem to go wrong, and of course everybody blames the kids for being, you know, troublesome and just like problem children basically. And then finally they end up getting placed with this much older couple, Tiller and Sari. They both want to go on this like very specific trip that they've been dreaming about, you know, their whole life, and their husband or wife doesn't want to go with them, and so they're like gonna take these kids with them to kind of give them like a nice vacation, and so that they have some company on the journey. And so Dallas and Florida have understandably been very distrustful of adults given a lot of their past experiences, but we see them slowly start to open up to these I keep wanting to call them grandparents. I guess they basically are these kids like adoptive grandparents. Sari and Tiller were very happy already, but it's just really nice to see them like warm up to these kids, and it's not in a way that feels like cheesy or overly saccharine. Like Dallas and Florida are not like that at all, but it was just really lovely to see all of these people grow closer, and I just really liked this. I love the way this talks about like home and families, different kinds of families and relationships. The plot also went some directions I didn't expect or remember. I especially appreciated there were a couple of things that I was kind of preparing to be annoyed about, and then they didn't happen that way, which I love. And I also really enjoyed the writing. Like the way that Sharon Creech tells stories is just really masterful. Like the way that as we would see like Dallas and Florida spend time separately with their, you know, adoptive grandparents, the way that we would get little bits of stories and then we would hear kind of a similar thing from another perspective, but it didn't feel repetitive because of the different way it was told. Anyway, I just thought this was really well done. I gave Ruby Holler 4 stars, and I'm excited to keep reading or rereading Sharon Creech. Like, there's a reason that she is very highly thought of as a middle grade author. Next, I finished Rules for Being a Girl by Candace Bushnell and Katie Cotugno. And this is really interesting because Candace Bushnell wrote the Sex and the City series, which I have never read, and Katie Cotugno has written a bunch of YA romances, which I have also never read. So I think this kind of contemporary is maybe a little bit outside of what we might normally think of these authors as writing, but spoiler alert for my review, but I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. We are following our main character, Marin, and the English teacher at her high school, whose name is Mr. Beckett, who goes by Bex. He is like really popular, very young, very charming. He's like, you know, everyone's favorite teacher because he's so cool and approachable. And then one day Marin finds herself alone with him, and he actually kisses her, which is obviously like inappropriate, doesn't even cover it. That is like predatory and, you know, harassment and abuse. And Marin is like shocked and horrified, and this puts a different like a different spin or a different lens on this teacher and like the way that he interacts with students, and especially girl students. And she, like, Marin ends up starting to notice or starting to pay attention a lot more to the way that sexism and misogyny still operate at her school and just like in society. And she does end up reporting him, and of course not a lot is really done with it, and Marin is just getting, you know, steadily more frustrated and angry. And she's always been like, you know, the good girl. She's been well behaved. She doesn't like to make a fuss, and she realizes that she is going to make a fuss about this. And luckily she does have some people in her corner, even if it's not always the people that she expects. And yeah, the book is about like her navigating the stress of, I think it's her junior year, maybe junior or senior year, plus this incredibly, like, again, I don't know what adjectives to use, like distressing, again, doesn't cover it, but on top of this assault and harassment, she's just navigating the normal stresses of being a teenager, friendship difficulties, and yeah, I thought this was absolutely fantastic. I really liked Marin as a main character. I think she was written in a really interesting way, and I just really felt for her. I wanted things to turn out well for her. I was so furious on her behalf, and I thought her character arc was done really well. Like this kind of like building realization that things like this, like that she's been letting things slide that she shouldn't have. Girls are taught to let things slide, and when everything kind of comes to a head with her teacher coming on to her, Marin has run out of patience, and I feel like the portrayal of that anger was done so well. And I also think that the portrayal of Marin's like uncertainty about this was done really well. Like the way that she victim blames herself and like has to fight that instinct just as she's fighting it in other people. I thought that was just very compelling, and it felt very believable. I also thought the like different family and friendships in this book were written really well. They were very interesting. There is a very slight romance subplot in this book, but that's definitely not the main point. But I thought that was written well also. I thought this book did a great job of, like, I feel like I say this about a lot of contemporaries that deal with misogyny and rape culture, but like connecting these like quote unquote small incidents, not what happened with Marin's teacher, but like, you know, like the sexist jokes people make, or, you know, when a girl gets upset about something, saying like, wow, are you on your period? Like that kind of thing connects that to these bigger issues and shows that these are part of those bigger issues. I thought that was just fantastic. I also want to mention, like, I have not read, for example, My Dark Vanessa, but I think that this book is less emotionally grueling to read, which is not at all to minimize what Marin goes through, or how awful and unacceptable this is, but in terms of the way the story is written, from what I've heard, I think this would be less difficult maybe for somebody to read, which I think those kinds of books definitely have a place, you know, like I think it's important to have kind of a variety of those. And then also one of the, I think, most impressive things about this book was related to the writing, and like specifically the writing of this teacher, because like from the beginning, the way that Marin is like talking about him and the other students are like talking about him and viewing him, and the way that his actions are like characterized and written in the book, it is so smart from these authors, because you can see how these teenagers would view this as him being really like approachable and young and hip and fun, whereas if you're reading this as, you know, an older reader, like an adult like I am, or possibly even, you know, teens who are in this book's target audience, like as the audience you are reading the same things, and it is incredibly disturbing because you see how inappropriate it is. And I just was really impressed at the way that those kinds of, both of those layers were operating at the same time with the same narration, you know. So yeah, I thought this was great. I feel like I haven't really heard anyone talk about it, and I feel like the average rating is maybe not great on this one. I would guess one of the critiques people have is that this is a very like focused story. Like there are side characters and there are like other plot lines. Like I really loved Marin's relationship with her grandmother, and that was just very heartfelt. So there are other things going on, but in general this is a very like tight and focused story, which I think isn't a bad thing, but some people might think that not enough happens. I think people's feelings about the ending are going to vary a lot, and then also I would guess that probably some people might feel that Marin's kind of character arc wasn't as convincing to them. Like I think it makes perfect sense why when she has something this traumatic happen, she would be forced to pay attention and to stop letting things go in a way that she hasn't before. But you know, your mileage may vary. So anyway, I loved this. I gave Rules for Being a Girl 5 stars. And next I read another incredible young adult contemporary, and that is It Sounds Like This by Anna Mariano. Anna Mariano is one of my all-time favorite authors, and you will have heard me recently defending her other contemporary book because I feel like she's more well known for her Love Sugar Magic series, which I adore, but I think her contemporaries are incredible as well. And I think I might love this one even more than This Is How We Fly. I don't know, but this is fantastic. So this is kind of loosely connected to This Is How We Fly because we are following the main character's stepsister, Yasmin, and this is set several years later. And also this is a very loose take on Snow White, kind of like, I would say even less than This Is How We Fly is a Cinderella retelling. I think this is just, there's some nods to Snow White. Like, don't go into this hoping for a retelling. But we're following Yasmin, who is like ready to basically take her sophomore year by storm. She's a very high achiever and she works really hard. And this is the year after Hurricane Humphrey really like devastated a lot of Texas. And so they basically didn't have a regular high school year, and so Yasmin is like determined to get back on track. She has it all planned out about how she's gonna get first chair for flute and band and all of these things, but things pretty much immediately don't go according to plan because she reports a student for sexually harassing another student. The entire low brass section of marching band gets suspended from marching band for the whole year, so now they don't have a low brass section, and Yasmin is kind of like guilted into like joining that section even though she plays flute, which is totally different, and she knows that this is kind of like her fault, even though like, you know, she was right to report this, but she feels like she is responsible for the loss of the low brass section, and so she's gonna like get them back on track and everything, even though it's like a bunch of like freshman boys basically who are enthusiastic but not necessarily the most dedicated. And so Yasmin is trying to get them to, you know, care about their chances in like these marching band competitions and everything. And she also is getting to hang out with her longtime crush, who is the drum major. But as they spend more time together, even though she really likes hanging out with him, she starts feeling like maybe she doesn't actually have a crush on this person like she thought. And there's also demi-rep in this, I believe demisexual and demi-romantic. And as I said, I just love this so much. For one thing, I adore Yasmin as a character. I think I love her even more than Ellen. And I really loved Ellen. Like, I just really connect to Yasmin. Like, she is really the peacemaker in her family, and she devotes just an incredible amount of energy to like not upsetting people, and she gets really stressed when people are, you know, unhappy with her or when she perceives them as being unhappy with her. And like, I just like viscerally connected to a lot of like the way that Yasmin lives life. Like there's several parts where we're kind of like seeing her do this like basically high level math to try and determine when the perfect time to like mention something stressful to like one of her family members or like to somebody she's talking to. And I just really connected with that. Like the amount of like energy and stress and worry that takes is exhausting, and so I just really felt very seen by Yasmin as a character. I also just thought the characterization in general was really fantastic. Like, Anna Mariano writes complicated family dynamics so well, and she does that again here. I loved some of the friendships, and I also really adored the romance plot in here. Apparently some people were underwhelmed with it. They don't feel like it was resolved, which I just strongly disagree with. I think, yeah, I guess maybe if somebody hasn't read demisexual or demi-romantic representation before, they might be thrown, but like it is very clearly like is resolved in the book. I loved the writing and the humor, and I just think that Anna Mariano does a fantastic job of balancing like her characters and the plot and the like themes or ideas. I thought the music and the band element were really interesting. I really loved seeing like the low brass group like gradually kind of get more comfortable with each other and become friends. Like I just thought that was really, really lovely. And also I really liked seeing, like, following Yasmin as she's getting ready to make her confirmation. So if you're not aware, in the Catholic Church, confirmation is one of the sacraments you make generally when you're in high school. And the main point of it is that, like, now that you are an adult or almost an adult, that you are old enough and aware enough to make your own choice about choosing to stay, choosing to be in the church. Because generally when you're baptized, you're like a baby or very young. And so this is kind of the church's way of giving people a way to say, like, yes, I am choosing this myself. I didn't just kind of get it handed down from my family. And I really just appreciated seeing that here. It's definitely not like a big part of the story, so if that is not something that resonates with you, I don't think it's gonna, like, you know, throw off your experience too much. But I just really liked seeing that represented, and seeing Yasmin worry about who she's gonna choose as a confirmation sponsor, and like just the messiness of being part of a church that does some really good things and really horrible things. And just, that's again not a huge part of the book, but even with the few kind of mentions we get, I think the nuance there was really wonderful. So yeah, I'm just obsessed with Americato. I thought this was fantastic. This, yeah, I might love it even more than This Is How We Fly. And I gave It Sounds Like This very strong 5 stars. Next, I finished The Lost Arabs by Omar Sakhr. This is a poetry collection that I had recommended by my friend Olivia Savannah from Olivia's Catastrophe. Omar Sakhr is a queer Muslim, and he talks about that a lot in these poems, as well as being of Middle Eastern descent, and like what that means, and how other countries have, you know, treated the Middle East, like the US, for example. I think my favorite poems tended to be near the beginning of the collection for whatever reason. And it was so interesting reading this fairly soon after reading that Mary Oliver book, because even though they're very different styles of poetry, I kind of had the opposite experience with this one as I did with Mary Oliver, because I said in my review for that one that the poems I love best from Mary Oliver are when she does her kind of, you know, usual like beautiful nature writing and like the natural world and like that kind of thing, and combines that with like emotion or like concepts or themes, rather than just the straight up like nature descriptions. Whereas with The Lost Arabs, I think the poems that I loved the most were the ones that were the most grounded, like that dealt with specific people or relationships or like locations. A lot of the ones that were about like different locations, and like, for example, some of them that dealt with bombings, I thought were incredibly like powerful and very effective. Like they had a huge impact, and I thought those were really brilliant. I feel like the more like metaphorical ones, or the ones that didn't have as much like concrete I don't know, elements to them, I think they lost me a little bit, because even though like obviously poetry is very subjective, and like also obviously metaphor and imagery is generally a pretty big part of poetry, which is not a bad thing, but I think that for some of the more like concept focused poems, I feel like I would just get lost in the string of like descriptions or metaphors, and that made the poems feel like less effective to me. But as with any poetry, it is very subjective, and I did still get a lot out of this. I probably would get even more out of it if I were to reread it, which I might do at some point. So I haven't rated The Lost Arabs yet, because I'm still kind of figuring out how to balance those two very different experiences. And also, like, Omar Sakhr is writing from experiences that I don't share, so it's kind of like expected that I'm not gonna like maybe connect with some of the ones that other readers would. And finally, the last book I'm going to talk about today is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This is a many times reread. I don't even know how many times I've reread this book over my life, and this was a reread for the live show that I did with my lovely friend Hannah from Ball Gowns and Books, as part of my Not a Genre book club. So I will link that discussion down below. It was wonderful. We had such a great time like analyzing and digging into this one. And this is a children's classic novel where we are following Mary Lennox as our main character, and in the very first chapter, like basically the first few paragraphs, I think, her parents die of cholera. She's living in colonial India, and so she ends up getting shipped back to England to stay with her uncle, who she's never met. Lives at this big strange manor house called Misselthwaite Manor. Mary is not a very pleasant little girl, and yet I love her. I have said several times, like, she's like my favorite my favorite little brat, because I just think she is so incredibly well written as a character, and like the rest of the premise of the book is that Mary ends up becoming fascinated by this secret garden that was locked up and that supposedly nobody knows what happened to it or where it is, and she becomes determined to find it. And as she does, she gradually starts to open up to people, and to kind of allow herself to make friends and to allow people to like her. And it is just a really, really beautiful story in a lot of ways. There are definitely some issues with it, which I will get to. But yeah, I love Mary so much. I think this book was pretty formative for me as a kid for kind of forming my tastes in terms of like the development of stories, because I think Mary Lennox's character arc is one of my favorites I've ever read. I love that she is still so much herself at the end of the book. Like, yes, she is kinder and like nicer and, you know, more friendly with people, but I've said this many times too, you get the feeling at the end of the book that she could still scream somebody out of a tantrum if she had to. And I love that, and I think that is so rare for especially children's classics to have such a prickly little girl as the main character, and for her to stay pretty prickly at the end. I just love that. The writing is wonderful. There's like those gorgeous nature descriptions, of course, but I also really loved just the spooky atmosphere in some parts of this book, and also the characterization and the humor. I thought those were beautifully done as well. I love the relationships and the friendships here. I think in some ways this book is a little ahead of its time in the way that it talks about mental health affecting your bodily health and things like that, but there are definitely some of its time elements that are really not handled well. Like the ableism and racism in this book, I definitely would give a warning for, and there are some parts of that I think are less egregious than you might expect. Like, for example, the way that ableism is kind of talked about, like, I think the book is commenting on it in some ways, and they also did not do the like magical miracle cure for a disability thing. Like the book makes it very clear that when one of the characters does start getting better, that yes, it's a result of these other things they're doing, but one important part of it is that this character did not have like actual like damage to their body in these specific ways. So they avert kind of the magical cure for a disability trope, which is nice, but there are other parts that, again, it does not do very well. And in addition to just the general colonialism of the premise, they're like the way that the native Indian people are talked about and kind of the Orientalism and exoticism associated with India is also not great. So if you are considering reading this one, I do want to mention that. But in terms of the story, I do think there are a lot of strengths to it. I loved this reread. I would probably give this around like a 4.5 stars. Yeah, so that was the group of books I'm going to talk about today. Let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought, or if you want to pick any up. I feel like I had a lot of really big hits this month, a couple of really incredible contemporaries, and also I feel like a common thread in a lot of these was like really loving the main character. So let me know a main character that you loved recently. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!